My name is Marin Alara Cross, 32 years old. The day my sister told me I'd never done anything that actually mattered, the air in our parents' dining room went thin, like someone had opened a window on the wrong floor and the pressure dropped all at once. Sunday lunch, roast chicken. My mother's new table runner, white as a dare. Katie narrated her latest orbit. Some real estate guy who gets her and how she might move to Arizona with him because no one here understands her ambition. Right. I wasn't sitting close enough to touch her, which is probably why I didn't. I was at the end of the table, doing what I always do, keeping her kids from baptizing the runner in grape juice, cutting grapes into halves, then quarters, then eighths, because our family anxiety expresses itself as geometry. For 4 years, my weekends belonged to those kids. I'd wiped noses, read bedtime stories, paid for field trips, covered rent once when Katie lost her phone for 2 weeks and ghosted her landlord. I did it without fuss, not because I'm holy, but because family is the note you hold even when you're out of breath. Across the table, Evan, my boyfriend, caught my eye when Katie said Arizona. The look he gave me was a gentle question. You okay? I wasn't sure, but I nodded anyway. Katie kept going. Life is hard. No one really helps her. Some people act helpful, but make things harder. Her voice took on that bright, brittle edge it gets when she's narrating herself as the protagonist of a storm only she can feel. Then she turned her face to me, full sunlight. You've never done anything that actually mattered. Silence rearranged the room. Evan's hand tightened around his water glass. My mother set her fork down, the way you set down a sharp thing. My father cleared his throat, the world's oldest peace treaty. I stared at my sister and said nothing because all the words I had lived in the wrong tense. I thought of the anniversary dinner I canceled because Katie had plans and needed someone to take the kids last minute. The weekend trips Evan and I postponed twice, 3 times. The overtime shifts that paid for sneakers, backpacks, permission slips. The nights I drove across town to tuck them into beds that were too small and too loud, TV glowing like a second moon. Katie lifted her glass as if she'd just said something wise. No one toasted. Evan stood first. He didn't argue. He just picked up his jacket, touched my shoulder in a way that said, "We can leave whenever you want," and walked out. I waited 1 minute, maybe 2, long enough to see if anyone at that table loved me enough to stop me. No one did. Outside, the air was cool and clean like truth. Evan didn't say anything until we were in the car. You don't have to be her gravity anymore, he said softly. That night, I started making changes you can't see from the outside. I silenced Katie's name on my phone. I told myself a new story. If I do not draw a line now, I will spend the rest of my life balancing on hers. Friday morning, a text. Katie, hey, can you take the kids overnight? I've got a thing. I typed no and felt my spine align like a zipper. Saturday afternoon, voicemail. Long sighs, a few sad pauses arranged like punctuation. I didn't respond. A week later, the tone sharpened. Katie, I have plans. Me, get a babysitter. Katie, can't afford it. Me. You posted 3 wine bar pics 2 days ago. Evan and I drove 3 hours north to a cabin where the phone signal gave up and the lake made an honest mirror of the sky. We watched a movie without pausing for crisis, then sat on the porch passing a blanket back and forth as if it were a treaty we were both willing to keep. The quiet wasn't empty. It had shape. By Monday, Katie's texts were a weather map. Can't believe you're ignoring me. The kids are asking about you. This is immature. Then, if you're done with me, fine. Explain it to my children. Don't be a coward. And finally, the old standby. You've chosen your boyfriend over your family. I didn't answer because I finally understood the math. With Katie, help only counted when it was hers. If it didn't benefit her directly, it never made the ledger. On Friday, she appeared at my job. Through the glass doors, 2 kids in tow, their backpacks hanging like excuses. I stepped into the lobby. What are you doing here? Emergency, she said, already shifting weight like the conversation bored her. Take them overnight. No, she didn't even fight, just muttered something that sounded like selfish and left. That night, my father called to ask if everything was okay between me and my sister. I told the truth like it was a new language I'd been practicing in secret. He sounded tired in a way I hadn't heard before. The next week, Katie dropped the kids at my parents' house and said she'd be back in a couple hours. She didn't return until Sunday night. No texts, no calls. When I stopped by midweek, my mother's eyes were ringed with the kind of sleeplessness you can't cover with makeup. My father held my nephew with one arm and answered emails with the other, the way men of his generation apologize without admitting it. "Do you know where she is?" he asked. I shook my head, and even if I did, I didn't say, I wouldn't tell you. Sometimes grief looks like anger, and sometimes it looks like a woman refusing to be useful to the wrong person. Over the next weeks, Katie tried a full range of climates: pleasant hail, sunny manipulation, thunderstorms of guilt. Groceries? I paid the school lunch accounts directly. A long weekend for her mental health? No. Borrow money for a new phone? No. Every answer to her was no. Every answer for the kids was documented, specific, and direct. Evan and I started planning the road trip we'd postponed for 3 years. We Googled rentals. We laughed in kitchens that didn't belong to emergencies. My life, which had been cloud-covered by my sister's weather, found its own sun. Of course, peace is the one thing that makes certain people itch. Late on a Saturday, after we got home from the lake, someone pounded on my door like the building was on fire. I knew the rhythm. "Katie doesn't knock," she announces. She stood on my porch already mid-explosion. No kids, mascara running, fury as costume. "You abandoned me," she shouted. "You turned everyone against me. You're ruining my life because you won't do the bare minimum." Evan stood behind me, arms folded, quiet as a wall. His silence gave mine somewhere to stand. "You think I'm manipulating them?" she snapped. "You're the one whispering behind my back." "Maybe you're doing that all by yourself," I said. She spun, stalked down the driveway, and dragged her keys across my car. The sound stitched metal open. For a second, I didn't move, not from shock, but from the recognition of a line crossed and gone. Evan didn't freeze. He was out the door in 3 strides. "Enough," he said, voice steady as a locked door. "You show up again. You speak to her like that again. You touch anything again. We call the police." Katie laughed the way someone laughs when the party's over and they still want music. "Brainwashed," she sang, a word she loves when adoration runs out. Then she peeled away like a teenager who's learned the wrong lesson. I stared at the long, deep scratch across the passenger side and thought, there it is, the written version of what she's been doing to me for years. The next morning, Katie routed through our parents, claimed Evan had threatened her, claimed she was afraid to drive past my house. She also claimed she needed help just until she gets back on her feet. The woman never met a cliff she didn't misname as a trampoline. By week's end, I could feel something shifting in my parents that had nothing to do with me. They'd been running their own numbers. Drop-offs like their home was daycare, disappearing acts, the boys' club of faceless men drifting through Katie's nights. My mother said they were tired. My father said they were thinking about something drastic. When I came over alone, at my mother's request, the dining table was covered in binders and printouts. Dates, times, teacher emails, pediatrician notes. A photo of my niece with a small oval burn on her forearm, curling iron, left plugged in. My nephew asleep on a bare mattress at 2 p.m, yesterday's shirt still on. "We're filing for temporary guardianship," my father said, and there was no tremor in it. I thought about the sentence that snapped that Sunday room in half. I thought about how sometimes truth arrives dressed like a door. "Do you need me to do anything?" I asked. "Not yet," my mother said. "Just stand with us if it gets ugly." It would. It always does. And still, the part of me that had been everyone else's emergency finally felt the house of my life take a deep, clean breath. The Monday after the key across my car, I filed a police report. It wasn't vengeance. It was a timestamp. The officer took photos, logged the case number, handed me a thin white card that felt heavier than it looked. "If she returns, call," he said, like he was passing me a sentence and a shield at once. Katie didn't return that day. She chose a different stage. By noon, she'd posted a story, a selfie in a sunlit kitchen, captioned, "Starting fresh. Boundaries are self-love." I laughed out loud in my office, then closed the app and went back to a spreadsheet where columns told the truth, whether you liked it or not. That week, a familiar choreography resumed with new beats. She dropped the kids at my parents' house for a couple of hours. Needed to swing by a meeting. Didn't want to expose them to adult stress. Hours bled into days. My mother texted me a photo at 10:41 p.m. My niece asleep on their couch, book open like a wing against her chest. She waited for her bedtime call, Mom wrote. It didn't come. On Wednesday, Dad called me from the garage so the kids wouldn't hear. We can handle this, he said, voice pitched low, tired. But I need you to know we're making notes. Notes? Dates, times, when she drops them, when she returns, what she says, what condition they're in. He cleared his throat so quietly I might have imagined it. If this keeps up, we'll need more than patience. He didn't have to say the word. I heard it anyway. Custody. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the police report card, clipped to the fridge with a magnet shaped like an orange slice. We had all started collecting evidence against the storm. Katie alternated between silence and performance. On Thursday, she texted me, "Emergency, help," and sent nothing else. When I asked what happened, she replied, "Figure it out," and didn't pick up when I called. 40 minutes later, her story pinged again. Stemmed wine glass, manicured hand. Girls' night, glitter filter. My responses became policy, not conversation. Groceries? I loaded the kids' cafeteria accounts, ordered uniforms, sent the Amazon receipt to my mother. Can you spot me $200 for a new phone? No. Can you take them Saturday? No. Are you really doing this to your own sister? I'm doing this for your kids. Evan taught me how not to flinch when my phone buzzed. You don't owe the siren a shipwreck, he said, half asleep in the dark, and I fell a little more in love with him for making poetry out of a boundary. Friday afternoon, Katie tried work again. I was prepping for a client call when she slid into the lobby with the kids like it was a daycare check-in. I met her at the door. I need you to take them, she said, not bothering to make it a question. Tonight, maybe tomorrow. Things are complicated. I'm at work. Everyone works. I'm not your concierge, Katie. Her smile tightened. The kids looked up at me with the kind of hope that sits heavy on a child's face. I knelt and handed them each a pack of fruit snacks from the bowl we keep at reception like a tiny mercy. Grandma's house tonight, I said gently. I'll see you Sunday. Katie rolled her eyes so hard I could hear it. You're beyond selfish. Then you'll be fine without me, I said, and walked back through the glass while the kids watched me disappear into the reflection. That evening my father called, the way he calls when he's trying to walk both of us back from a cliff. Is there any way? He started, then stopped. No, sorry, that's not fair. You've done more than your share. There were new things in his voice, apology, and a thin wire of anger he wasn't used to holding. The days arranged themselves into a pattern only people inside the pattern recognize. Katie appeared when she needed to, vanished when she didn't. My parents' house developed its own gravity, homework at the table, soup pot on low, bedtime at 8:30. I dropped off notebooks and a set of colored pencils that smelled like kindergarten and rain. My niece drew a house with an orange door and 2 people in front, each with a crown of yellow hair. That's you and Grandma? I asked. She shook her head. No, Grandma and Grandpa. He makes pancakes with smiley faces. There are compliments that make you cry in parking lots. I was halfway to my car when my phone buzzed with a new hurricane. You think you're so high and mighty. You always wanted to make me look bad. You've turned Mom and Dad against me. I typed and erased, then sent 5 words. The kids are safe. That's it. She replied with a photo of a tattooed forearm on a steering wheel, a ring flashing under neon. Got someone who actually wants me, she wrote, which told me nothing and everything. Days later, the kids arrived at my parents' house with 2 plastic grocery bags labeled essentials. Inside, a shirt with a wine stain, a charger that didn't fit, a single sock with glitter embedded in it like a bad idea. My mother washed what could be washed and bought what couldn't. She stopped asking whether Katie was coming back on Sunday. Instead, she said, "We'll see." I brought over lasagna and cleaned the bathroom while no one was looking. My father stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. Your sister thinks we're conspiring against her, he said finally. We're conspiring for them, I said. He nodded like a man taking a new oath. Katie's response to losing access to my time was to try for my reputation. She called relatives, reframed history, auditioned for the role of wronged daughter. A cousin texted me, "Are you really freezing her out?" I sent one screenshot, the message where Katie told me I'd never done anything that mattered. The cousin didn't reply. Silence can be an ally when the truth is exhausted. One night I woke to the soft ping of a text I didn't want to read. I know you told Dad to take my kids. then another. You could never have your own family, so you're stealing mine. I stared at the words until they blurred, not from tears, but from a long, low fury, at the lie, at the audacity of it, at the part of me that used to believe I had to defend myself to a person who didn't argue in good faith. Evan switched on the lamp. What did she say? The same thing she always says, I answered, and set the phone face down like I was closing a door. Saturday brought sunlight and a soccer game at the park near my parents' house. Clipboard moms, grass stains, a whistle trying to keep everyone on schedule. My nephew ran like joy punching holes in the air. My niece sat on the blanket beside me painting clouds in the tiny watercolor pad I'd tucked into her backpack. My mother clapped like applause was oxygen. My father held 2 juice boxes like a man who'd never been more certain of his purpose. Katie didn't come. On the drive home, my mother asked, "Do you remember when you were 10? And you sorted all your crayons by color, then by height, then by whether they had their wrapper?" Embarrassingly well. You've always believed in order, she said, thoughtful, not unkind. You've tried to make a family out of a mess. I'm done trying, I said, and meant it in a way I hadn't before. That night, someone pounded on my parents' door without knocking. My father opened it to Katie mid-storm, words like knives with nowhere to land. I wasn't there. I heard it later. She accused them of theft, brainwashing, betrayal. My mother told her to lower her voice. My father said, calm and clear, "You cannot come in, raging, and stay." When she didn't stop, he called the police. It was the first time in my life I'd ever heard my father chose law over blood. They issued a warning and left. Katie peeled away. The house exhaled like it had been holding its breath for 30 years. For 7 days we heard nothing. Not a text, not a call, not a single "how are they" from the woman who had once insisted I rearrange my life around her calendar. My parents fed them, bathed them, signed permission slips in blue ink because that looks more official, packed lunches with notes tucked under apple slices. My niece lined up her watercolor paintings along the bookshelf like flags planted on new land. My nephew asked if Grandpa could teach him to ride without training wheels, and when he fell, he didn't cry. He laughed, then tried again. On the 8th day, the doorbell rang at my place. Katie stood on my porch with a man I'd never seen, shaved head, neck tattoos, an expression that looked like boredom wearing a mask. She smiled a smile I didn't recognize and handed me a thick envelope. "What's this?" "Read it," she said, "since you all love paperwork so much." Inside, a summons. She was accusing my parents of kidnapping her children. I didn't perform outrage or surprise. I didn't ask why the man beside her was there. I simply stepped back inside, locked the door, and set the envelope on the counter like a dirty dish. Evan glanced at it, then at me. "Let her try," he said. On Monday morning, a judge let her try for exactly 7 minutes. He looked at the calendar entries, the photos, the weeks of vanishing acts, the police report from the night she was warned not to return uninvited. "If you push this," he told her, voice even, "we open a formal investigation. Based on what I'm seeing, that won't go the way you think." Katie blinked, calculated, and withdrew. 2 days later, she dropped the kids at my parents' house with no goodbye and didn't come back at all. A week passed, then 2, then a beach photo appeared on her page, sunset, margarita, a man's forearm around her shoulders. New chapter, no regrets. There are sentences that feel like doors slamming from very far away. My parents stopped waiting. They called a lawyer. They called the school. They called the pediatrician, the counselor. They gathered letters, forms, calendars, the kinds of evidence that make judges exhale and nod. When my phone rang that night and my mother said, "Can you come over? Alone? It's about the kids," I knew the shape of the next room we were about to enter. I put on my shoes quietly. Evan walked me to the door. "You want me there?" he asked. "I think I need to hear it first," I said. "Then I'll know how to stand." He kissed my forehead, the way you bless someone without telling them you're praying. On the drive, the city looked like a spreadsheet of lights finally adding up. The night my parents asked me to come alone, I thought maybe Katie had finally resurfaced with an apology rehearsed in the mirror. I was wrong. When I walked into their dining room, the table was buried under papers. Not bills or recipes, evidence. A thick binder labeled in my mother's handwriting. Katie. Documentation. Each page was dated, clipped, and cross-referenced. Drop-off times, pick-up times, missed weekends. A pattern of absence plotted like a chart only love would keep. There were photos, too. One of my niece's forearm, an oval burn from a curling iron Katie had left plugged in. Another of my nephew asleep on a bare mattress at 2 in the afternoon, crumbs on his cheek, still in the same clothes as the day before. My father slid the photos toward me like he was presenting exhibits in a case he never wanted to build. "We're done covering for her," he said quietly. My mother's eyes were rimmed red, but her voice was steady. "We're filing for temporary guardianship." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My father, the man who once told me, "She's your sister. You don't turn your back on blood," now sat here talking about court orders. "What changed?" I asked. He didn't look up. "The kids." He opened a folder and pulled out a printout from the school counselor. My niece had told them she didn't want to go home, that there were always new men and loud nights, that sometimes they had to heat up frozen pizza themselves while Mommy was at a friend's. She was 9. My nephew was 6. My mother took my hand. "We can't let it go on." All I could do was nod. "Do you want me involved?" My father shook his head. "Not yet. Just be ready when it turns ugly." And I knew it would. 3 days later, it did. Katie somehow found out about the guardianship before the paperwork was even filed. She stormed into my parents' house unannounced, screaming so loud the neighbors came out, accused them of stealing her children, of poisoning them against her, of plotting with me. When my mother asked her to calm down, Katie shoved a chair so hard it toppled. That was when my father, for the first time in his life, called the police. They arrived, quiet and professional, and issued a formal warning. "Do not return without permission." The moment the door shut behind them, my mother started shaking. Not from fear, but from relief. The kind you don't recognize until it arrives years too late. Then Katie disappeared. A week of nothing. No calls, no texts, no updates. The kids started asking less and less. My parents slipped into a rhythm that looked a lot like parenting. They packed lunches, signed homework folders, practiced spelling words. They even framed the kids' drawings on the hallway wall. Still, there was a current of dread running beneath the calm, because with Katie, silence was never absence. It was preparation. On the 8th day, she came back. I knew it the moment the doorbell rang. It was a sound too hard, too familiar. When I opened the door, she wasn't alone. A man stood next to her, mid-30s, shaved head, tattoo creeping up his neck like smoke. He didn't speak. Didn't have to. He was there to be presence, not conversation. Katie smiled, all teeth and no warmth. "I want my kids," she said. "Mom and Dad have brainwashed them." Then she pulled a thick envelope from her purse and slapped it into my hand. "Since you all love paperwork, here's some for you." It was a summons. She was suing my parents for kidnapping her children. I didn't invite her in. I didn't even look at the man beside her. I just stepped back, closed the door, and locked it. Evan picked up the envelope from the counter when he got home. He read the first page, looked at me, and said calmly, "Let her try." The hearing lasted less than 10 minutes. The judge flipped through the documents, eyes skimming the timeline, the police report, the photo evidence, the counselor's notes. Then he looked at Katie, sitting there with her tattooed boyfriend and her new ring flashing under the fluorescent lights. "Ms. Cross," he said, "if you pursue this claim, I will be obligated to initiate a full child welfare investigation. Based on what I see, that would not end well for you." She blinked, swallowed, and withdrew the complaint on the spot. 2 days later, she dropped the kids at my parents' house again. No warning, no goodbye. This time she didn't come back at all. At first we waited a week, then 2. Then the photo appeared on social media. Katie in a straw hat, margarita in hand, standing on a beach with a man's tattooed arm around her waist. Caption: "New chapter, new me, no regrets." My mother stared at the screen for a long time before setting the phone face down. "She's not coming back," she said. For once, no one argued. My parents called their lawyer, then the school, the pediatrician, and even the kids' old therapist. Every single one of them agreed to back them. They filed for full custody within the month. By then, it was easy to prove what we had all known. Katie had abandoned them. The day the petition went through, my father came home from the courthouse and just stood in the doorway like he didn't recognize his own house. The kids ran up, wrapping around his legs, shouting, "Grandpa, Grandpa!" He knelt, hugged them tight, then whispered something I didn't catch. Later, when I asked, my mother told me. He'd said, "You're home now." That night, my niece came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes. "Can I tell you a secret?" she asked. "Always." She hesitated, glancing toward the hallway. I told my teacher I don't want to live with Mommy again. My hands froze under the water. Did you? She nodded. Because Grandma makes pancakes and Grandpa says goodnight every time. There aren't scary people here. I turned off the tap and hugged her. When she went to bed, I walked into the garage where my father was pretending to organize his tools. He didn't look up when I told him what she said. He just whispered, "Good." Weeks passed, and the court date for permanent custody approached. Katie didn't show, not once. No lawyer, no statement, no contest. Her silence was the final signature. My parents' names went on the papers. The kids' last names stayed the same, but their world changed forever. The school updated their contact forms. The pediatrician listed my parents as guardians. When my nephew slipped and called my dad Dad at dinner, everyone froze for half a heartbeat. Then my father smiled and passed him the mashed potatoes. No corrections, no need. For the first time, every sound in that house felt like belonging. A few days later, Evan and I repainted the spare room in our house, soft greens and warm creams. He laughed when I called it my neutral rebellion. We were finally building something that wasn't a reaction to Katie's chaos. 2 months later, that room would become something more. But that part of the story starts with a stick, a faint pink line, and the sound of Evan's breath catching in his throat. That part begins with hope. When you spend years living inside someone else's crisis, silence feels unnatural at first. Too still, too fragile, like calm before a storm. But after the court papers were signed and my parents' guardianship became official, the silence stayed. And for the first time, it wasn't ominous. It was peaceful. Katie didn't show up for the final custody hearing. No statement, no objection, not even a call. Just an empty chair where the storm used to sit. The judge's gavel sounded like a door closing. Then, for good measure, locking. My parents walked out of the courthouse hand in hand, each of them holding one of the kids' backpacks. My mom cried in the car, not from sadness, but from relief. My dad didn't speak until they pulled into the driveway. He looked at me and said quietly, "We're not babysitting anymore, are we?" "No," I said, "you're raising them." He nodded once, then went inside to start dinner. The first few weeks after the ruling felt like watching a house breathe for the first time. The kids settled into routines that had never existed before: bedtime by 9, breakfast at the table, homework done before cartoons. My mom enrolled my niece in an art class at the community center. My dad taught my nephew how to ride his bike without training wheels. Every small victory, every scraped knee and burnt pancake felt monumental. One night, my nephew asked my dad if he could call him Dad. It slipped out like an accident, but when my father froze, the boy panicked. "Sorry," he said quickly, but my father smiled, scooped him up, and said, "I like the sound of that." And that was that. No one corrected him after that, not even once. At my parents' house, life was finally structured, but at mine, something else was taking shape. The spare room that had once been my catch-all for everything Katie left behind became a blank canvas. Evan and I repainted the walls soft green. He built a rocking chair from scratch, stubbornly, lovingly. I bought a lamp shaped like a cloud because it made the room glow like a lullaby. We didn't say the word baby out loud at first. Maybe we were scared we'd jinx it. Maybe we just wanted to keep something beautiful untouched by history for a little while. Then one morning, I came out of the bathroom holding a white stick, 2 pink lines. Evan's coffee cup hit the counter with a small clink. He didn't say anything. He just walked over, wrapped his arms around me, and whispered, "We're starting our own chapter now." That night, I stood in the doorway of that little room and imagined everything it could hold: laughter, footsteps, maybe a cry or two, but no chaos, no guilt, no late-night emergencies that weren't ours to fix. For the first time in my adult life, my future didn't involve cleaning up someone else's mess. Katie's shadow returned in the form of a text 2 weeks later, the first in months. "Katie, you think you're better than me? You think you all won?" Then another. "Katie, I was their mother. You were just the babysitter." And then one more, sharper, meaner, the kind of sentence designed to puncture. "Katie, you couldn't even have a family of your own." I stared at it for a long time, the pink lines from earlier still seared behind my eyelids. Evan walked in, saw my face, didn't even need to ask. I handed him the phone. He read the messages, exhaled slowly, and set the phone face down on the counter. "She's done," he said. And he was right. That was the last message I ever got from her. A month later, my mom called me crying. But this time, it was the good kind. The kids' counselor says they're thriving, she said through the tears. No nightmares, no anxiety at school. They're happy, Marin. They're finally happy. I sat on the kitchen floor and cried too. Not for Katie, not for what we'd lost, but for what we'd rebuilt. By the time I was showing, everything had shifted. My parents came over every weekend with hand-me-downs from the kids, tiny books, old toys, a blanket my niece insisted I keep because the baby might like purple. Our family dinners were smaller now, but lighter. No one walked on eggshells. There were no explosions waiting at the edge of the meal. Just stories, laughter, and that quiet, steady hum of normalcy we used to think was impossible. Evan would always say it as we drove home. It's like the whole house learned how to exhale. The night before my due date, my mom texted me a photo. The kids had fallen asleep on the couch, their hands still covered in paint from art class. In front of them was a half-finished sign. It read, "Welcome home, Grace." That was the name we'd chosen, Grace, for everything that broke, everything that healed, and everything that somehow became beautiful in between. When Grace was born, she came into the world loud, furious, and perfect. Evan held her first. When he placed her in my arms, she blinked up at me like she'd already seen too much and still decided to stay. 7 months later, we got married in my parents' backyard. My dad grilled steaks. My mom baked the cake. My niece picked flowers and braided them into my hair. The ceremony was small, just family, the real family. After we said our vows, my nephew tugged on my dress and whispered, "Can Grace call me Big Brother?" I nodded, tears already threatening to ruin the makeup I barely remembered putting on. "Yeah," I said, "she can." Sometimes I think about Katie, about the sentence that started all of this. "You've never done anything that actually mattered." She meant it as a wound, but it became the truth in reverse. Because everything that matters now, every laugh, every quiet morning, every messy, miraculous bit of peace, came from the moment I stopped letting her define what mattered. My mother told me recently that the kids don't talk about Katie anymore. At first, my niece used to whisper her name before bed. Now she just asks if Grandpa will teach her to ride a bike faster. My nephew tells his teacher his mom makes the best pancakes in the world. He means my mother. No one corrects him. Sometimes, when I tuck Grace into her crib, I think about all the nights I stayed up waiting for Katie's emergencies, waiting for permission to rest. Now the house is quiet except for the sound of my daughter's breathing. Steady, certain, alive. That's what peace sounds like. That's what a house finally exhaling feels like. 7 months after Grace arrived, life finally felt like it belonged to me. The morning started with her laughter, loud, unfiltered, like she already knew she owned the room. Even at 3 a.m., bleary-eyed and fumbling for the bottle, I never resented it. Every cry, every hiccup, every tiny sigh was proof that something good had survived all the bad. The nursery walls were soft green, the color of a beginning that didn't need permission. Evan painted them himself, humming off-key to the same song he'd played the night we found out we were pregnant. Sometimes I'd catch him standing by the crib just staring at her, that quiet kind of awe men rarely show until life strips them raw and makes them new. We named her Grace because of everything it took to get here, the heartbreak, the healing, the forgiveness we didn't know we were capable of. Grace wasn't a name, she was a statement. Our wedding happened exactly 1 month later. Not the kind of wedding that fills social media feeds or inspires hashtags. No grand ballroom, no matching floral arches, just our parents' backyard, white folding chairs, my niece scattering flowers in the grass, and my nephew insisting he needed a tie like Grandpa's. Evan stood there, nervous and grinning, while my mom adjusted the veil I almost didn't wear. Dad grilled steaks. The smell of smoke and rosemary drifted through the air like something holy. When we said our vows, my hands were shaking, but not from fear, from certainty. Afterward, my niece pressed a tiny drawing into my hand. 2 stick figures holding a baby under a yellow sun. "That's you, Aunt Marin," she said proudly, "and that's baby Grace. She's the sunshine." I laughed and cried at the same time. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a reclamation. The kids, my niece and nephew, were unrecognizable compared to the children they used to be. My dad still made pancakes shaped like animals on Saturday mornings. My mom hung every piece of their art on the kitchen wall until it looked like a museum of crayons and construction paper. They slept through the night now, ate real meals, knew the sound of consistency. My niece's art teacher said she was gifted. My nephew wanted to be a firefighter. To help people who get lost, he said once. When the counselor checked in, she called it one of the smoothest custody transitions she'd ever seen. There was no longer a trace of the fear that used to live behind their eyes, just laughter. And when my nephew accidentally called my mom Mom, no one corrected him. He wasn't wrong. Sometimes, late at night, after Grace was asleep, I'd sit by her crib and listen to the quiet. That kind of silence still startled me. I'd grown so used to waiting for the next explosion. The late-night calls, the guilt, the sound of chaos pretending to be family. But the house didn't hold those sounds anymore. It only held the soft rhythm of life continuing, uninterrupted. Evan would pass by the door, whisper, "You okay?" "Yeah," I'd say. "Just listening." He'd smile. "To what?" "The sound of peace." Every now and then, word about Katie drifted through the family grapevine like static. A cousin saw her in Arizona, working at a roadside bar under a different last name. Someone else mentioned she'd posted about starting a travel blog, but it vanished after 2 weeks. There were whispers about new boyfriends, new promises, new disasters. But for us, she had become a ghost, a memory that no longer haunted, just occasionally passed through. No calls, no letters, no birthdays. My mother stopped setting aside an extra plate at dinner. My father stopped checking his phone at night. The absence didn't ache anymore. It just existed. One evening, I was feeding Grace when my niece crawled into my lap, her small hand brushing against her cousin's. "Will Grace have a mommy and daddy forever?" she asked. I blinked, caught off guard by how serious her voice was. "Yes," I said softly. "Always." She nodded, satisfied, and whispered, "Good." Then, almost shyly, "Because I think everyone deserves that." I looked down at both of them, one tiny, one growing, and realized that was the whole story right there. That was what all of it had been for. The last anyone heard of Katie was a rumor, a blurry photo of her on a beach somewhere near Cancun, a drink in hand, sunglasses too big for her face. The caption read, "Here's to starting over." No mention of the kids, no mention of the life she left behind. I didn't feel anger anymore, just distance, like watching the tide carry something out that was never mine to rescue. Sometimes I think about that Sunday dinner, the sentence that changed everything. "You've never done anything that actually mattered." She meant it as an insult. It became my prophecy, because the life I've built since that day is everything that matters. When Grace wraps her hand around my finger, when my niece bursts into the kitchen with paint on her cheeks, when my nephew yells, "Dad, watch this," to the man who taught him how to ride a bike, those are the moments that rewrite history. Those are the moments that prove Katie was wrong. Last week, my mom sent me a picture of the kids sitting on the porch swing, Grace in their laps, all three laughing so hard, their faces blurred. Underneath, she'd written, "Everyone's home now." I stared at that message for a long time before replying, "Yeah, they are." Katie is still out there somewhere, probably telling herself she's the victim of a story she wrote and then abandoned. But the rest of us, we're not waiting for her return anymore. We're too busy living. We're building something she'll never understand, a life that's steady, unremarkable, and gloriously ours. And every time Grace laughs, I realize that peace doesn't sound like silence. It sounds like belonging.